If you stood where I stood on the hill above the river and held your breath, you'd swear the light itself was listening. Old paper against your palm, a window that faces east, a house that seemed to tilt a degree every time the moon was full, as if bracing for impact. A family kept a secret here. They wrote the same 3 words at the top of 100 entries, over 100 years: lock everything. It didn't help. The entries still turned into obituaries. Someone scratched a rule into the underside of a stair. No water, no knives, no high places, no goodbyes. It still didn't help. By the time I arrived, the journals were stacked like gravestones on a table that bowed in the middle. The last surviving Calder, a woman with ash on her sleeve and a stubborn, exhausted face, told me not to open the green ledger until the lunar disk cleared the birch. She said once I read the first page, I wouldn't forget it, not even with my eyes closed. She was right. Before we go any further, I want to know your theory. Drop it in the comments now. Curse or cover up? Keep that answer in your pocket. Because by the time we reach the last journal entry, one detail, one simple piece of handwriting, will force you to flip your answer. Part 1. The house that faced east. You could smell the river before you saw the house. Tannin and stone, wet leaves clinging to each other. The Calder home stood over the hairpin bend of water like a sentry that had been standing too long, shoulders slumped, shutters crooked, clapboards gray under their flaking paint. Every window was boarded except one, a half-moon window set high under the eaves facing east. When I asked why they'd left that one open, Rowan Calder, the woman who let me in, said, "We needed to know when it was coming." Inside, a dozen ledgers waited on a long table, the kind of farmhouse table that groans when you put your palms on it, as if it can still feel every coffee cup, every pair of elbows, every elbow-slammed outburst that ever hit it. The light in that room had no color. The walls were whitewashed so thin you could see splotches of old newsprint under the plaster, as if the house had been built out of stories. In a way it had. Rowan was the one who'd written the letter that led me here. Come now, before it's full again. The Calders, she said, had learned to fear one thing more than any other. The night when the sky turned bright enough to make shadows at midnight. A coin of light. A clean white eye. She never said its name. Not that day. She didn't have to. Read the first one, she said, nodding to the green ledger. Don't skip the left page. The green ledger started in 1898. It had a cracked leather spine, water-warped corners, and a brown ribbon that had been worried thin as a shoelace. On the inside cover was a graphite drawing, river, hill, a circle in the sky. 3 words written beneath it in a tidy woman's hand. Lock everything. Maeve Calder wrote the first entry. She dated it September of that year, the month of the harvest moon, though she didn't write those words. She called it the bright tide. The way she described it, the light on the water looked like a long, torn bandage. She'd tied strips of cloth around the apple branches that day to keep the children from climbing. She wrote the names of her children in a line, as if to keep them safe by writing them down. Samuel, Ruth, Jonas, and the baby who hadn't yet been named. She wrote that her husband Jonah was out late helping with a neighbor's broken axle. She wrote that she knew better than to look up, but that the east window was a magnet. She wrote that she heard the ladder scrape. She wrote that she ran. I could see her on the page, even without a photograph. The way a woman writes when she's sobbing into the ink and the nib scrapes down to fibers. How she writes the same word twice. How the page tilts left when she rushes it. She wrote, "We locked the barn door and tied the gate. We put away the knives and the matches and the lamp oil and the rope. We knotted the shutters with twine and twisted them until my palms burned. I tied the orchard ladder flat with 3 turns. I put the baby in the bassinet with a pillow on either side so he wouldn't roll. I took the bell off the cellar door. I told Samuel not to look at it. I told him it was like a man at a window. If you look, it waves you closer. He said, "It's so quiet, I can hear the spiders." I said, "Don't say that." Ruth said, "Mama, why do you call it he?" I said, "I don't." Then I heard wood groan at the orchard fence. I think it came loose. No, I heard the ladder. I can tell you what happened without telling you what happened. You know, some things sit in a sentence like a shadow sits in a room. You feel it, even if you keep your eyes on the corner and never turn your head. Samuel fell. He shouldn't have been able to. She'd tied the ladder flat to the fence. She counted the knots after they found him. 1 broken, 1 slipped, 1 still tight. She wrote that she'd never known how close you could get and still not catch someone. After they buried him, the family made a rule. They gave it a name and gave the name weight. The way people give heavy names to pets to keep hawks from plucking them off the grass. The rule, on bright nights, no one looked straight at the sky. They counted days. They shut down the house. They put bowls over buckets so no one could see water shining. They didn't say the word for the thing that took him. They called it the bright tide, the white coin, the sheep in the dark, the frost lamp. 2 months later, another entry. She wrote, "We locked everything." She had a different handwriting by then, smaller, cleaner. The grief had gone from a flood to a seam. She listed what they did. She listed what they forgot. They forgot the cellar window, the little round pane under the stairs to the apple cellar. She wrote that she caught the glimmer in that glass and had to brace herself on the doorway as if the pull was physical. She wrote that she turned and saw something she never described, and there's a break in the ink that still feels like a gasp when you touch the page. After that, the entries came regular as a tide. 1899, 1900, 1903, 1907. Maeve's children grew and married and had children of their own, and those children had children. The green ledger filled up with similar words, different objects, a barn hinge, a window weight, a drop in a well, a spark near a rag, knots tied and knots that broke. No one wrote the word how. They all wrote words like, we knew and we felt and it was like. No one wrote the word why. The habit formed and then hardened. They prepared for bright nights with the meticulous dread of a military parade. Names changed hands. New scribes took up the pen when old ones died. They dated and signed and wrote the same 3 words at the top. Lock everything. Rowan led me along the table, ledger to ledger. The next was blue, Ephraim's, covering 1916 to 1932, thin and precise. The next was cloth-tied, Celia's 1933 to 1949, with spidery cursive and words like hush and breathe slanting off into tiny scribbles at the edge of the page. Toby's leather-bound 1950 to 1966, with greasy fingerprints along the bottom margin, like he'd had his hands in a shop before he wrote. Ruth took over in 1966 and kept writing through 1982. Her pages were stiff with coffee stains and the occasional tear that had widened to a white hole. This house shouldn't still be standing, I said mostly to myself. It only falls apart when it wants to, Rowan said. And it's stubborn. How far back does it go, I asked. She touched the green ledger. This is where the habit starts, not where the story starts. What happens if you don't do it, I asked, and saw her jaw tighten, like I'd broken a small, important rule. She blew air through her nose. We're not the only family that counts. She looked toward the eastern window. It was still daylight, but the day had the look of a face that knew it would blush later. Rowan was the kind of person who didn't give you the whole cake before dinner. She gave you a slice and watched you eat and decided if you were going to choke on it. So when I asked how she'd ended up the last one left, how everyone else had spilled out of this house like beans from a punctured sack, she touched the edges of the journals with the soft part of her fingers and said, "We'll get there." On my first night in that house, I slept in the parlor on a divan that sighed each time I moved, as if it disapproved of changing positions. The room smelled like dry apples and the inside of a cedar chest. I woke in the middle of the night and lay there listening to the house breathe, a long crack in the plaster whispering around midnight air, a drip in the kitchen, the slight tick of cooling joists. Around 2, a fox screamed in the woods, and the sound tore through me like a ribbon cutting a wound open. When I fell asleep again, I dreamed of a wooden ladder with blue paint flaking off the rungs. 3 knots, 1 broken, 1 slipped, 1 still tight. In the morning, Rowan put a set of small brass keys on the table. "You'll need these," she said. "One for the desk in the office, one for the trunk, one for the cupboard behind the stair." "What's behind the stair?" I asked. She looked at the half-moon window and said, "The thing I can't look at without feeling it look back." Before she walked away, she said, "You should know something else. My father tried to buy a calendar that didn't have it on it. He went to 3 different hardware stores and asked for a calendar with blank circles. They thought he was making a joke. He wasn't." Part 2. The ledger's edges. The trunk under the stairs was older than the house. Its lid was bowed and blackened by long use. Brass corners greened with verdigris. It smelled like wool and old rain. Inside were the bones of a life that didn't make it into the ledgers, ribbons, buttons, dried lilac heads that had turned the color of the moon when it's low on the horizon and looks like it's been buffed with ash. There were also smaller books inside, pocket notebooks bound in canvas, string-tied bundles of letters, and one thing I almost didn't pick up because it wanted to be left alone, a folded envelope with a crispness that didn't match the rest of the trunk. The envelope was addressed to the Lunar Safety Society in a typeface you don't see anymore, the kind that stutters as if it has a bad cough. The postmark was faint, but I could make out the year, 1971. The return address was not the house, but a post office box in town. "Was there really a Lunar Safety Society?" I asked, as I held the envelope up to the light. Inside, something slid. Paper against paper. The sound a whisper might make in a room that wasn't ready for one. They called themselves that for 2 months, then changed it to something worse," Rowan said. "Lunar Safety turned into Moonkeepers and then the Radiant Brotherhood." She rolled her eyes at that last one. "Finally, this is the part that would be funny if it hadn't gone the way it did. They settled on the Lantern Eveners, which sounds like a church supper with torches." "What did they even?" I asked. "Fear," she said. We drove into town to the old post office. The building had the kind of brick you could read like a map. Places where the mortar had changed hands, cracks that had spread and been stitched back together with a fingerful of cement. The postmaster had a limp and a coffee mug that said, "No spoilers." He took the number on the key Rowan had brought and ran his finger along the rows of boxes until he found the one. "This one expired before I was born," he said. "You'll need the manager." The manager was a woman who wore her glasses on a chain. Her name was Marla. She bit the inside of her cheek when she concentrated. "We don't usually do this," she said as she fitted the key. "Boxes go empty. Boxes get filled. Life moves. But this one never got cleaned out. Someone wrote a note on it." She leaned in and squinted. "Here. 48 hours either side. Keep it in the vault." She opened the box. Inside was a dried leaf and an envelope with the same typeface as the one from the trunk. I held the new envelope up to the light and saw 3 dark shapes, a newspaper clipping, a slip of paper with a word printed on it in heavy black letters, and a small photograph. We opened it together in the post office lobby under a tin ceiling that had dented like a thumb pressed into the soft part of your forearm. The clipping was from the local paper, a short, awful story from July 1971. The headline, "Moonlight Claims Another Calder." The details were sparse, as small-town papers tend to be when they love you and hate telling your story. A fall downstairs, a sprained ankle turning into something worse, the kind of bad luck that reads like an alibi the longer it goes on. The name was Aaron Calder, Rowan's father. The slip of paper had just 3 words on it. Count the lights. The small photograph was of the east window, taken from outside. You could see the curve of the glass, the reflection of a yard lamp, the faint outline of someone's face, maybe, or maybe just the smudge of a finger on the lens. The kind of picture that makes you think you know more than you do for about 3 seconds, and then you realize you don't know anything more at all. You've just been given another question to carry. "Is that your father in the clipping?" I asked. Rowan's jaw tightened. "He sprained his ankle 2 nights before," she said quietly. "Kept to bed. Stayed there on the bright night. The house did what it does. He went down anyway. He hit the newel post. He died on the 2nd step." She took the clipping and folded it once and then unfolded it, and then put it back in the envelope. After that, we stopped using those stairs. "Who put this in the box?" I asked. "I thought you'd tell me," she said. Back at the house, the midday light was cold and thin. We opened up the ledgers with the kind of reverence you reserve for things that have both information and power over you. You can read a court document like a grocery list. You can read a diary like a confession. The ledgers were something different. They were a ritual, repeated until ritual turned into habit, and habit turned into law, and law turned into a story you tell yourself so often you forget you wrote it. "This is Ephraim," Rowan said, tapping a line from 1918. Ephraim wrote, "The bright night had no edge. We hung the blankets over the sinks. We hid the mirrors under quilts. We took the bell from the cow and put it under the mattress so she couldn't shake it. I counted breaths. I counted the cracks in the parlor ceiling like it was a map. I don't think the thing wanted us, but it wanted something. It pressed against the window, and then it didn't, and then it did, like a cat kneading wheat and then sitting on it. I told my mother to put flour on the step so we could see if it left prints. She said, 'You don't want to know if that's true.'" Celia wrote in 1934, "I braided rope until my fingers bled so I'd have something to do with them. I thought if my hands were busy, nothing could happen." The clock ticked. I put my hand over it. The clock ticked under my palm. Every little noise sounded like a decision. The baby swallowed air wrong. "Oh God, oh God." I hit him on the back. He breathed, he breathed, he breathed. A storm came and ran the bright out of the sky. I slept under the table and dreamed my teeth were falling out one by one, and when I woke up, my mouth hurt. Toby wrote in 1952, "I sat with my back against the pantry door and a hammer in my hand because I didn't know what else to do. You can't keep a thing like that out with a hammer, but it's better than bare hands. The dog crawled under the sink and wouldn't come out. He bit me when I reached. There's a kind of quiet that's loud, where you can hear everything thinking. When it was over, I stood up, and my legs didn't work for a minute, like they'd forgotten what legs do." Ruth in 1969. "We didn't say the name for it because if you say a name, you make a mouth, and a mouth is an invitation. I stuck my head under the bed and looked at the slats, and told myself that was what the world was. I'm too old for that, and I'd do it anyway. We listened to the radio. Every song sounded like a joke we weren't in on. Toby turned it off. I turned it back on. He turned it off. I said he was going to get a skillet to the ear in a minute. We laughed, and then we didn't. The color of that light is like a bruise you get when you don't know what you bumped into. I'd read for hours before I realized I'd been curling my toes under so hard they hurt. I stopped, flexed them, and looked at the east window. I counted the panes. I counted the nail heads in the sill. I counted the knots in the wood floor. A slip of paper from the post office box lay between my hands. Count the lights. What is that? I asked. A warning? A taunt? Both, Rowan said. She had a way of saying both that made you believe things could be two different things and neither of them the one you wanted. We took the envelope and the keys to the town archive, a former church with arched windows and a smell like paper that remembers when it was a tree. The archivist was a woman with hair like a surprised dandelion and a sweater that was someone else's once. She'd worked there long enough to be part of the furniture and not mind it. Calder, she said when she saw the name. You're either a story or a lawsuit every time I see that on a box. Story today, Rowan said. We pulled a box labeled Calder Misk from a shelf that held other boxes labeled with family names that felt like a roll call of a place. Ives, Cade, Menard, Pease. Inside were letters, scraps, a program for a 1910 harvest fair, and a receipt for 50 pounds of flour with a coffee ring that made the number look like a planet. There was also a photograph of a group of people standing on a lawn, all in their Sunday clothes, staring seriously at the camera. The back said, Lunar Safety Society, April 1971. The people in the photo were the kind of people you pass in a grocery store and don't notice. The ones who hold doors and say, you go ahead. The ones who bring baked beans to potlucks and leave before dessert because they have something in the oven at home. A dozen of them in a line. Two I recognized, Ruth and Toby. The rest were neighbors, a minister, a woman from the school board, a man whose car repair shop smelled like steel wool and coffee. On the left end of the row, a young man with the same chin as Rowan, Aaron, her father. His hands were in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. What did they do? I asked. They made lists, Rowan said. They didn't think of themselves as believers. They thought of themselves as practical. If you can't fix the storm, you fix the shingles. They put together a catalog of everything in town that could hurt you when the sky turned bright. Ladders, wells, knives, fuel oil, candles, barn lofts. They tried to coordinate. Don't all do stairs on the same night, because if someone calls and you all broke your ankles, it's a mess. They made signs. Lock, tie, count. Count the lights, I said. Rowan nodded. You'd be surprised how many people have more lamps than they remember. Or how many candles are stuck in drawers with birthdays on the mine and not the other thing. Counting turns your head away from what you can't control. The archivist snorted. Some of them counted so hard they fell over when they stood up. That sounds like a joke, Rowan said. And it isn't. Back at the house, I pulled up a video I had seen when I started digging into this, the kind of thing that floats around and gets reposted whenever 100,000 people decide to believe the same thing at once. The title was Pure Gasoline: Why Hospitals Still Fear the Full Moon. One of those compilations of nurses and ER docs telling stories in tired voices about nights when the hallways feel 2 degrees of temperature off. So patients sit up and stare down the length of the ward as if someone is coming. Some of them swore to numbers. Some of them swore to the feeling. You can argue with numbers. You can't argue with the feeling in someone's shoulders when they describe midnight. I don't think it makes people crazy, Rowan said, still refusing the word. I think some people make themselves crazy so they won't feel something worse. Helpless. Do you? I asked. She picked up a ledger and held it like a baby. I think we inherited an argument between a house and a sky, she said. And we took it personally. Part 3. The pattern that doesn't want to be named. On the inside of the east window frame, someone had ticked tiny pencil marks. Notches, each one a night, each set of 4 followed by a cross. I ran my finger over them, counting in a whisper. Nobody knows how human it makes you feel until you start counting things that don't need numbers. We taped a long sheet of paper to the dining room wall and made lines like a timeline and dots like blood spatter at a crime scene. We wrote names and dates. We drew connections that felt like theories and erased them when they started to feel like superstitions. We highlighted summer nights and winter nights and nights with storms and nights with none. It didn't make a picture. It made a thicket. Any line I drew sliced through a dozen other lines that wanted their own story. What about outside here? I asked. Did other people? They didn't keep ledgers, Rowan said. They kept casseroles. She tapped the name Cade on the archive list with her finger, a name that turned up in the ledgers like a burr you can't get off your sock. The Cades have opinions about this house. Why? They think we started it. Did you? I think people break under different kinds of weight. She had a way of answering questions that wasn't the question I'd asked, but made more sense than the question I'd asked. It kept me out of stupid corners. We drove the truck to the Cade property across the bend of the river and up a dirt track that was still a road only because the map said it was. The Cade house looked like a cousin of the Calder house that had gone to the city for a few years, learned to cut its hair and stand up straight, and then come back with a polite smile that hid its teeth. The man who answered the door was in his 70s and had the kind of blue eyes that fade like paint in sun. Rowan, he said in a voice that softened 3 letters and sharpened 2. Well, the river still runs downhill. Forrest, she said. We're not here to argue. Then you ought to have come with your mouth full of cake, because otherwise you're going to argue. He poured coffee into cups that had hairline cracks, like faded lightning. We sat at a table scarred by restless cutlery. We used to do this every bright night, he said. Drink coffee and wait for the phone. A Calder or a Cade didn't matter. We'd get news. We set aside a covered dish, a handful of nails, a length of rope, a pot of glue. It was all one kind of problem, really. Things that didn't stay where they belonged. Why do you think it's us? Rowan asked. Why do you think it starts here? Because you always wanted to name it, he said. And when you name a thing, you can put your mouth on it, and then you own some of it. We just duck our heads and walk. He put a note in our post office box, I said. Count the lights. He thumped his coffee mug down so hard the handle chimed. You think I write with a typewriter? I can't make my phone say its own name half the time. Who else? I asked. Plenty of people still believe in paper, he said. Paper is proof. Screens are fog. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling, as if there were answers written on the plaster. Your father and I had an argument in 1971. He knocked on my door with a bruise the size of a lemon on his shin. He said he'd fallen downstairs, sure. He said if something took him, he wanted it to take him standing up, not lying down. We went out to the east field. We stared at the edge of the wood like it was going to do a trick. He said we needed to give the thing what it wanted before it took something bigger. What does that mean? I asked. Men who don't know what they're afraid of make work, he said. They decide a plan will save them. Aaron wanted a burnt offering to the night, not a person, he added quickly at the look on my face. Not a barn, something in between. He called it a distraction. I called it a sin against common sense. He went home angry, and I went to bed angrier. What did he do? Rowan asked, and her voice had a rope in it that had just been pulled. I can only tell you what I heard, Forrest said. I heard the pigs scream like a train. I heard someone curse and then pray. I heard a door slam. I heard your mother cry, and I didn't go. And that's the worst thing I did in my life. I didn't go. We drove back to the house with air in the cab like a storm building without thunder. Rowan didn't cry. She didn't blink more than usual. But the muscles in her jaw jumped like a horse's flank. We parked and didn't get out. The Ledgers sat in the dark house like a jury. My father was not a butcher, she said finally, to nobody and to the whole sky. He was a man who didn't sleep. Fear makes choices nobody wants to own, I said. Fear keeps the bad company you tell it to, she said. It obeys your rules and convinces you it's doing you a favor. We went back inside. The late afternoon light had angled just enough to turn the east window into a bright, blunt instrument. We pulled the blue ledger off the stack and found a page in 1971 with 2 words written on it in a male hand in a pressure that had nearly cut the paper. Sorry, Ruth. Proof, Rowan said, and her voice fell apart on the O. There it is. Proof I didn't want. Proof of what? I asked. Sorry is a wide word. It stretches. Sorry covers a multitude, she said. He didn't say for what. Behind the stair, there was a small cabinet with a lock so stubborn, it felt like it was biting the key as it turned. The inside smelled like something that had been living there and had decided not to leave after you opened the door. On the shelf, a box of things that shouldn't live together. A mason jar with coins in it, a photograph of somebody's elbow, a stack of letters mailed to a post office box with no return addresses, and a small metal tool that looked like something you'd use to pull nails, only too dainty, too fine. There was also an 8mm film can labeled in blue pencil, Blue Moon, 1969. We shouldn't, Rowan said. We should, I said. We shouldn't have watched it. We did. We set up the projector in the parlor and gave the machine a table to buzz on. The film rattled into itself and the room filled with a light that loved dust. In the footage, kids in matching pajamas sitting cross-legged on a braided rug. A woman's foot tapping in the corner like rain threatening to happen. A staircase that took up too much of the frame. A man's shadow leaning into the room and then leaning back, as if gardening the air. The brightness through the east window made every other shadow harder, sharper. It turned the room into a place with edges. 10 seconds in, the camera shook like whoever held it remembered a reason to be afraid and forgot how to use their hands. You can see a thing and then not be sure you saw it, and then see it again when you try not to. In the reflection in the east window for 3 frames, there was a face that didn't belong to anyone in the room, unless faces can learn to be heavy without bodies. It could be a doll, I said. It's worse if it's a doll, Rowan said, and the projector made the sound a wasp makes when it's jammed in a window shade. We watched the film twice, then we put it back in the can. Some things don't want daylight, or they want all of it, not what we gave them. I could hear the late-night silence of that house pressing against the sides of it, even in bright day. That evening, on a whim, I took a drive along the river alone. I stopped at the footbridge that connected the west bank to a copse of birch trees that had grown so close together they braided themselves at waist height. Old rumors live in places like that. a kind of whispered geography where kids dare each other to go at night. The kind of footbridge that creaks under your weight like a complaint, making you wonder if you're rude to stand on it. A carved initial in the rail, ACRC. I ran my finger over it. The wood felt like skin that had learned to callous. Every bridge is a promise with a price, Forrest had said. As the last of the day drained out, I stood in the middle of the bridge and watched the water like it might tell me something if I held my breath. The white sky turned into the color of a black eye. The first star showed up so timidly I almost missed it. A kind of early star that looks like a mistake. Yeah, as I walked back, I caught the faintest smell of something I didn't like. Paraffin. Candle carried on someone's clothes. Far away, a car door shut with the softness of someone being careful to make a decision sound like an accident. Part 4. Count the lights. It was an hour past midnight when the house woke up around us. I don't have a better way to say it. The timbers stopped pretending. Something in the wall cracked that hadn't cracked during the day. A draft from the hall took on a shape. Rowan came into the parlor and stood with her arms crossed over her, wearing a sweater that had been her mother's and a look that said she could smell the same thing I could. Wax. She put her hand on the east window frame like she was taking someone's temperature. "Stay downstairs tonight," she said. "Nobody takes stairs when the sky's bright." "I thought we weren't calling it that," I said. "I don't call it anything," she said. "Calling it nothing works just as well as calling it words. It gets what it wants either way." We counted the lamps. We counted the candles, a ridiculous number. People tuck them everywhere. A candle is a promise and a threat. It will save you, and it will kill you if you forget about it for 5 minutes. We lay the candles out on the long table like silverware. 22. How do 22 small columns of wax weigh more than a house? We put them in a box with the lid off so it wouldn't smell like hiding. "Who put the note in the box?" I asked, the question in my mouth like a tooth you can't stop tampering with. "Someone with a key," Rowan said. "How many keys are there?" "More than there should be." She smiled without humor. "That's true of most things." While she made tea and tried not to open the green ledger again, I walked the perimeter of the house and put my palm on the wall at intervals, like you do with a horse, letting it know you're there and you aren't afraid. I paused at the cupboard behind the stair. The lock was fine now, polite even. Habit makes locks think they have power. I opened it. Inside on the top shelf, now that I knew what to look for, something new. A folded paper wedge stuck under the mason jar. It had not been there earlier. The kind of placement meant for discovery by the right hands. I unfolded it. Type. Calm, steady. A sentence as clean and non-specific as a streetlight. "Don't look out the east window." I carried it to the kitchen. Rowan didn't say anything when she read it. She leaned against the counter with her eyes closed. "I am going to ask you a favor," she said. And I braced for a thing with cost. "Pretend you think this is a person." "It is a person," I said too quick. "Pretend," she said without opening her eyes or raising her voice. "Pretend so your brain goes down that hallway and finds doors. If we let it be the other thing, we sit on the floor and we wait." "Okay," I said. "We have a person who uses a post office box and typewriters and thinks they're funny. A person who wants to control where your eyes go. A person who keeps the rules alive," she said. "The lantern oveners folded in 1973. The Radiant Brotherhood became a joke and then a brawl. My father died. Somebody else kept counting." "Your father wasn't the only one," I said. "You said that like you'd seen the proof." She nodded toward the upstairs hall. "I should have burned them. I couldn't. Ruth's God would have frowned at me so hard, I would have turned over in my own grave later out of embarrassment. We climbed 2 steps up and stopped when the stair moaned, like a bad feeling you get in your gut telling you what you already knew. On the landing under the window that looked out toward the birch, there was a table that had held a lamp once. The lamp was gone. In its place were 3 envelopes, one with my name typed on it, one with Rowan's name typed, one with no name at all. The east window threw a rectangle of light over them like a hand. "You brought me here on purpose," I said to the air, which was stupid. Nobody thinks a stranger will arrive and make a story better. They think a stranger will make everything worse, and they're right. I opened my envelope. Inside, a photograph of the east window taken from outside, like the one from the post office box, only this time you could see us. The 2 of us, distorted by glass, standing in the parlor looking up at the landing. The sort of echo only a sick mind would enjoy. The sort of echo a camera gives without meaning harm. The sort of echo that makes the hair on your arms wake up. A slip of paper. "This is where you say you're being watched." "Say it," Rowan said quietly. "I'm being watched," I said. She opened her envelope. Inside, a clipping from a different paper, not local. A headline like a slap, 5 words and a year. "Woman falls on bright night, 1966. The woman was Ruth." The details smelled like something rotten in a kitchen trash bin. The piece blamed a loose railing that had been loose for a year and nobody fixed it, and a pair of slippers that were slick on the sole. It nodded at a rumor. It did not name it because respectable papers don't name rumors. It said what people tell themselves when they're too nice to tell the truth and too mean to say nothing. It said everything and nothing. Rowan folded it along a line that had been folded 100 times and then again, until it was the size of a coin. "What's in the 3rd one?" I asked. "Don't," Rowan said. I opened it anyway. Inside, a triangle of paper and a piece of string. The string was dyed the color of heartbeat blood. The paper said in type, "Tie it around your wrist." We didn't. We stood there with the light making a pattern on the wall that has a name in every other house and didn't have a name in this one. We put the envelopes back on the table because we didn't have a better place to put them. Somewhere far away, I couldn't tell if it was in a field or the side of my head, a coyote yipped and then laughed like a drunk who thinks he told the best joke. We stayed downstairs. We made bad tea and pretended it tasted good. We pretended to read old pages, and we mostly just moved our eyes over them while our inner ears strained toward the ceiling. Sometime after 2, I heard a soft sound like fingertips on a window. Rowan got up without moving her chair back, like a dancer conserving momentum, and went to the dining room doorway. "Don't," I said. She smiled at me, like somebody who knows a trick and is kind enough not to perform it. "I'm not looking out," she said. "I'm looking at it." "What's the difference?" "You'll know if you live long enough," she said. In the morning, there were footprints in the dew on the grass leading from the east side of the house to the birch. Bare feet, the size of mine. We stared at them until they dried in front of our eyes and disappeared into evaporation. At the end of the line, a gentle depression in the grass where someone had stood and looked back at the house a long time. We followed the track to the hedge. On the other side, a thoroughfare of deer prints and raccoon hands told a story of everything in the woods that didn't care about people's ideas. The next day, we went back to the archive. The dandelion-haired archivist had something in her hands when we walked in, like she'd been waiting upstairs at a window for a kid to come home after curfew. "This was tucked behind the cade box," she said. "It's not their handwriting. It's your family's hand, and it's old. The paper smelled like sugar gone bad. The handwriting was neat, the way neat turns into a weapon when you're angry and need control. It was dated October 1898, a month after Maeve's first entry. But it wasn't in the Green Ledger. It was separate. In a letter addressed to no one and everyone, Maeve wrote, "He came to the door and said I had ignored his warnings and that the water would take what it was owed. I told him I owed him nothing. He said it was not his debt I carried. He said a woman knows when she owes a light. He said the light keeps tallies. He said to count them and see." He leaned against the door and laughed like a man who had eaten. He smelled like smoke and lemon. When he left, there was a mark on the door where his head had been like oil. I washed it, and it came back. I would not lock the door if I thought locks mattered. Locks keep honest men honest. They do not keep light out. He said his name was Leto. He said it was not. He said he was a different thing on different nights. He said to count the lights. I put a finger on the word Leto and thought of ancient stories about beautiful women and men who turned into animals to avoid doing terrible things. Names change, people stand still. Part 5. Breakage. One thing everybody forgets is that fear breaks on a schedule too. It wears you out until you fold, and then it stops wearing you out. And you sit there on the floor and look at your shoes and think, I was busy when the house wanted me busy. That afternoon, tired enough to risk something, Rowan took me through the orchard. Ladders still lived there, flat under vines like turtle shells. The fence was patched with mismatched wood because matching would have required a trip to town that someone had decided wasn't worth it. The air tasted like iron and leaves. This hill had watched so much it decided people were a kind of weather. She stopped at a tree with a scar where a rope had bitten the bark. We never talk about the rope, she said. We say the word string instead. It's ridiculous. Habits are a way to steer a boat in your head, I said. She touched the scar. 2 days after he sprained his ankle, he took the rope off this branch and put it in the shed. He told me if you remove the temptation, the appetite decreases. He talked like a man who wanted to arrest the wind. He made rules nobody could keep and then acted disappointed when they couldn't keep them. He made himself into a voice the house could throw when it needed to. We sat on the grass and watched the river do the one thing it knows how to do. I think there was a night in 1898 nobody wrote about in the ledger, I said. I think something happened in this house and they used the sky as a story to hide their own part of it. Maybe somebody stepped wrong. Maybe somebody drank. Maybe somebody was cruel quietly. They put it away in the place you put things when you intend to forget them and you can't. Don't make them murderers, Rowan said. They were not monsters. I am making them human, I said, which is worse than monsters and better than angels. She leaned back and closed her eyes. A leaf fell onto her hair and stuck there, a small flag of nothing. Okay, she said. If the first night was our fault, the ones after didn't have to be. We kept the habit. We did the work of the thing for it. We made sure we had a story to tell people who love stories. We gathered our pain into neat rows so nobody would trip on it in the hallway. She opened her eyes. I don't want to write another entry. What do you want to do? I asked. I've lit candles for everyone and snuffed them and lit them again, she said. I've knotted rope until my fingers bled and then washed the blood off in a bowl I couldn't look into because that's a mirror and we don't look at mirrors when... She stopped herself before the word. I want to put the ledgers in the trunk and put the trunk in someone else's house. I want to write an entry that says, we watched it and it watched us and nothing happened. And then I want to make that true. You can decide a thing like that and still have to live through the day. The bright night came around like a train on a track. Nothing slows it. We stacked the ledgers. We ate soup because that's what you eat when you're bracing. We counted lamps. 22 again. We didn't count candles. We didn't count spoons. We did count breaths, because those matter. When the bright poured over the east window like a spilled bucket of milk, we stood together in the dining room and held hands like some kind of church, and we did the wrong thing on purpose. We looked right at it. It didn't kill us to look. It pulled at us. It made everything else in the room recede until nothing was left but our two faces reflected in the glass. Two people with old stories under their eyes. "You tell it," Rowan said, louder than you'd tell a person, and softer than you'd tell a god. "We're not writing you down. We're not feeding you. We're not counting you like your taxes. We're not giving you anyone. We're not giving you anything." The house did not explode. The window did not crack into 1,000 pieces. The parchment-thin plaster did not flake off into a white waterfall. The lights did not go out. A fox screamed in the woods like it always does, and then stopped. A branch tapped the roof like a finger, and then the wind changed its mind. We went outside and stood on the grass in our shoes and without our coats. Like two children testing a temperature, their mother told them they'd catch their death in. We breathed the bright and didn't die of it. We walked to the birch. At the base of one of the trees, half buried in the leaf litter, there was a rusted tin that someone had used as a secret and then forgot. Inside the tin, a handful of coins, a broken watch, a rag with a piece of cord tied through it in a loop, and a note sheet with typing that made me want to put my teeth into wood. Same type, same calm. The ledger writes you, not the other way around. We left the tin at the roots. We were tired of carrying other people's evidence. On the porch step, I felt something under my heel, a nail head that had been proud for a century. A small, stupid hazard you ignore until you can't. I hammered it down with the bottom of a mug. Rowan laughed, a real laugh, different than the technique laugh we'd practiced in harder nights, and stuck her fingers in her back pocket and pulled out the smallest ledger of all. One she'd started when she was 16 and had hidden so completely she had forgotten it was still inside her clothes somewhere. She flipped it open and read something she'd written when she thought the world would decide whether it wanted her. I wrote, "The bright nights don't make this house dangerous. Everything is dangerous. Everything is tender. We make a list so we don't drown in that knowledge. We make a list so when the river takes what it wants, we can say we tried. I don't like how using a pen makes the world sound like you meant for it to be the way it is. Sometimes ink is a door you lock behind you. Sometimes I think the only way to break the door is to write the opposite." She went to the table and wrote a new entry in the green ledger on a blank back page nobody had used because nobody writes on backs if they're sentimental. We opened the east window and watched the sky watch us. Nothing took anything. We took our own breath and held it and let it go. Nobody fell, nobody bled, nobody drowned in a bowl, nobody tied or untied anything. We didn't name it, and it didn't need a name. We put the ledgers away like dishes after supper. We put the candles where they belong and didn't apologize to them. It is bright outside. We are going to sleep. In the morning, we carried the ledgers to the truck and drove to the university archive, not the town one, the big one, with temperature control and locks that work, and a man who made us sign 3 different forms that all said the same thing in different words. We asked them to keep the ledgers sealed for 20 years. We asked them to let people read them after that. We asked the man with the careful hair to make the word access sound like a favor the way it always does. "Do you want to add context?" he asked. "A statement of provenance? An explanation of how the material was gathered? No, Rowan said. I want the pages to sit in a box and maybe cool down. We drove back to the house. It looked smaller without the weight of paper inside, like a person who had finally handed someone else their crate of rocks. We stood in the parlor and looked at the east window, and neither of us counted anything. Do you think it's over? I asked. I don't think things like this end, she said. I think they stop taking. I think people stop giving. That's different. We had one more thing to do. We drove to Forrest Cade's place with a jar of pickled beets because it felt like the right offering to a man who'd seen too much of his own and not enough of ours. We sat at his table and told him what we'd done, and he rolled his eyes at the archive, and he rolled them again at the idea that you could leave your bones in someone else's house. You did what you had the energy for, he said. Energy is the only currency that matters after the sun goes down. On our way out, he handed me a small folded paper of his own, typed in a different typeface, still stern. You can be haunted by a thing and not be possessed by it. Learn the difference. On the last night before I left, I stood at the east window alone. The light was a smear across the river like salt tossed on black velvet. I thought of Maeve tying knots that might have held and might not. I thought of Ruth choosing slippers for the comfort they promised and paying with her balance. I thought of Aaron's sorry and all the other sorries we never put where someone could find them. I thought of a man named Leto who told a woman to count lights because he knew she'd spend the rest of her life doing it if she believed him. Control is a drug you don't know you're addicted to until you try to stop taking it. The window glass made my face a little abstract. My eyes looked like someone else's. That was fine. The family in those pages had stared themselves into ghosts and then back into people. Not many houses get to see that. If you came here hoping for a neat ending where a photograph exposes a murderer, or a hidden will redeems a villain, or a curse turns out to be a creaky step, you got something different. You got the truth that sits in the woods more often than it sits in a courtroom. Fear is a generous storyteller, and it will keep handing you drafts until you sign one. The family kept signing. Then they decided to stop. If it were you, if it were your staircase, your east window, your neighbor with a face the sky had studied too long, what would you have done? And if you were the person with the typewriter and a pocket full of paper and a habit of leaving notes that make the air colder, what would you do when nobody read them anymore? I folded the last note and left it on the table under a jar of buttons where it would sit and get dusty and turn into nothing. The house looked pleased with itself, if houses can look. Sometimes breaking a curse is as boring as going to the archive and filling out forms and eating soup and not lighting candles. Sometimes it's as bright as daring the sky to make you look away and not blinking. When I closed the door, the latch caught the way it always had, a small, clean click, a sound that said, things can stay shut if you tell them to, and if they don't, you still know where your hands are. That was the story of the Calders, the family that spent a century counting what they couldn't control until they decided to stop. If this kind of dark history, haunted folklore, and real-life mystery pulls you in, join us at Sanctified Secrets. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss the next investigation. Your theories and thoughts keep these stories alive, so drop them below. And if you want a part 2 with the Cade side of the ledger, say the word.